My group of friends and I love spending time with each other on every trip and vacation, every time we took off work. However, each time we all hung out, we tended to get into a lot of chaotic stuff. First, there's Margaret, my girlfriend who lives with me as well as my first friend. We first met each other during high school and have been close friends ever since. And she even lived with me as we both got old enough to buy a house. Basically, Margaret is obviously your typical loving and supportive girlfriend. Then there's Jake, the hilariously weird and funny one of our group. I'm not too proud of calling him a weirdo, but he does a lot of shenanigans, sometimes which of course gets him into a lot of trouble. Despite the many troubles, he's also a very likable dude when you get to know him better. He also liked to barbecue and drink with us time to time. Then there's Emmett with his wife Gwen. Like us, Emmett and Gwen first met each other during high school and developed a close relationship ever since last year. They both got married together as husband and wife, which I'm very proud for both of them. Emmett and Gwen mostly spent their romance out onto the great doors, appreciating the beauty and Mother Nature herself as a nod to their childhood memories. Then there's Hugo. He was the largest and tallest out of our group. Hugo liked to hike as much as Emmett, but unlike him, Hugo was mostly a hatchet-throwing enthusiast. He also used his trusty hatchet to cut branches and woods to set up campfires when he's camping alone or with us. Then there's Vicky, a fisherwoman. Fishing was basically a hobby for her whenever it was her job or free time. She also liked eating seafood, which either eating at piers or at Red Lobster, as she also developed a crush on Hugo the first time, led to her staying with Hugo as his girlfriend. Then finally, there's myself. I'm not really good at describing myself, but you could call me Richard. And I mostly have a willingness to try almost everything and go to almost anywhere. Like I said, every time we hang out, fun but chaotic shit happens. On our summer vacation was Jake's world famous barbecue party. Everything was great, eating and drinking. That was until Jake accidentally set a stack of paper plates on fire, and those blew into various paper cloths we had arranged. We managed to curtail the fires before they could spread any further, but that didn't deter the fire department from showing up anyway. That weekend before our summer vacation, Hugo and Vicky invited me, Margaret, Jake, and our other friend Tom to a hotel for a date. Basically, it was a peaceful time, and Vicky's date with Hugo was perfect, and nothing else outrageous happened there. Oh wait, I forgot. That silly old Jake. As while Hugo and Vicky were in the hot tub and Margaret was in the pool, me and Tom were drinking at the bar, and suddenly, a drunken Jake who was obviously not in his swimsuit and was still in his regular clothes ran to the pool as he wanted to show off his mega super awesome cannonball. But in a moment of drunken chaos, he slipped before he reached the water and ended up cracking his tailbone before sliding into the water like a blob. Don't run next to the pool, kids. I could go on and on about all the events we all experience every time we hang out with each other in the past, but I'm here to talk about my event that happened last weekend. Like I mentioned previously, we all took some time off work, and it was my time to decide what we'd all do. We usually don't take turns choosing like this, but no one seemed to come up with a different plan. One day, I was in my bedroom with Margaret. I've been browsing through different destination spots and activities around my area. After spending about an hour or two, I stumbled upon a rather interesting post. Someone was renting a massive cabin in a normal-sized shack nearby a lake, about an hour's drive north. Looking through the photos and glancing over the price, I knew right away this is what I wanted to do. I called the place and rented it out for the weekend. The man on the phone sounded oddly excited about me renting the property. After speaking with him and finalizing everything, I hung up and told Margaret my plan. She was also excited, just like the man on the phone, so she approved and told me to tell my friends for my plan. I then got on my phone again and immediately called my friends about my plan. They were all almost excited as the man on the phone and Margaret. Jake wanted to bring his grill with him so he could barbecue there. Emmett and Gwen wanted to go as well so they can admire the beautiful sights of nature, as Emmett wanted to walk on the loop trails together with Gwen, while Gwen herself wanted to bring marshmallows, graham crackers, and chocolate to cook s'mores on a campfire, while looking at the beautiful night sky, looking at the stars and constellations. Hugo wanted to bring his tools along with his trusty hatchet to chop up some wood parts to make a campfire, and Vicky bought some fishing gear so we can lounge by the lake. Our older friend Tom also tagged along with us as well. Yeah, forgot about Tom. He rarely spends time with us and is not really an outdoors type of person, but he wanted to go as well as he was bored of spending time inside his home all day alone. We each arrived at the cabin and the shack at about mid-afternoon at 3 p.m. The sun wasn't quite setting, which was good as it gave us a bit of time to survey and inspect the cabin itself. The cabin was much way larger than I expected. For the price I paid to rent it, it seemed like a really good deal. The cabin was next to that shack, which had the lake behind that said shack. And the other side of both the shack and cabin was the crowded woods behind them. Only a solitary dirt trail leading to and from both houses themselves. Jake was already unloading his grill, and Hugo already got his tools out as he was already chopping wood, branches, and tree parts with his hatchet, not 5 minutes after the both of them arrived, while me, Margaret, and the rest entered the cabin. The interior was very rusted, but I already knew this much from the photos. The different types of mounted animals dotted the high walls. The living room was quite large. It almost looked like a recollection hall. A wooden staircase wrapped along one edge leading up to multiple bedrooms. An expansive kitchen took up half of the bottom floor, along with as well as a decent-sized bathroom. It looked like this place was designed for big groups for people to rent and enjoy. After exploring the house a bit, I wandered outside too and took a look in the surroundings. It was such a peaceful evening as I stood there breathing in the fresh air. I looked to see that shack and went there to see what was inside. When I went to the shack, I noticed that the door was ajar, so I opened it to see what was inside. Basically, looking inside the shack, I noticed that it looked very worn down inside. And there was nothing else apart from a small table, a rack, an empty chest at the center, and 2 portraits on the walls of the shack. One portrait had a family, a father, a mother, and 2 children, while the other portrait had a portrait of what seemed to be a hunter. Both portraits looked like they were in poor condition, probably due to how long they had been in the shack. Speaking of which, it's strange how none of the photos showed what's inside the shack. So here I am looking inside. As soon as I walked out of the shack, I then also realized something a bit strange. Apart from Jake fiddling along with his grill and Hugo chopping down wood parts with his hatchet, there was no sound coming in the forest. I couldn't hear any birds or animals or even insects. Hell, I can barely hear the sound of a lake nearby. Even though it was odd, I tried not to think about it too much. The following night came, as the dawn turned into dusk, and after spending time at the campfire eating some burnt steaks Jake so graciously made for us, along with eating the better tasting s'mores from Gwen as dessert, we all retired to our respective bedrooms. Now, sleeping in a new place always made me feel a bit nervous. I may be the only one, but whenever I stay in a hotel or at a friend's place, and even with Margaret with me, it always takes me forever to fall asleep. At least during the first night. This isn't a major issue and doesn't keep me from traveling. just an odd quirk, I guess. The bedrooms were quite nice. Minimal, but decent. It had a large 2x2 bed, big enough for 2 people to sleep, a stout dresser, a nightstand with a small lamp, an empty closet adorned the wall adjacent the door, and at the far wall was a long window that overlooked the trees and the lake. While Margaret was asleep next to me, I lay there as letting my mind wander as my eyes danced around my room. I wasn't staring at anything in particular, just trying to take in my surroundings so I could fall asleep much easier next time. My fatigue was slowly starting to hit me, and just before my eyelids shut, I saw a faint bit of movement in the corner of my eye that made me open them once again. I couldn't be sure, but I thought for a split second I saw something or someone standing at our window. But that couldn't be possible because all the bedrooms were on the second floor, and they were all a straight drop down to the dirt below. My eyes locked onto the window, but after focusing closer a bit, there was nothing out of the ordinary. The next day, we all got up bright and early. There wasn't a whole lot to do aside but walking around the property, so that's what I did. Hugo was getting ready for a hiking trail adventure that I joined with later. While on the outside, Jake was already preparing some food while Emmett, Gwen, Tom, and Vicky started day drinking. Margaret was still inside resting in the living room while I stood outside on the wooden porch with a cup of coffee, looking at the shack nearby. I once again let my eyes look around as I sipped my coffee. Once again, there was hardly any sound, which I still thought was odd. I wondered why it was so quiet in the woods, a place that is often filled with the sounds of life. As my eyes drifted, I looked at the shack and its door was wide open. I remember closing the door when I got out of there, but maybe I forgot. But then, suddenly, I saw it close. That confusedly caught me off guard, and I thought my eyes were still in the process of waking up. As strange as it was, I didn't think much about it, and almost forgot about it. In the next hours, I was walking on a long walking trail loop with Margaret, Emmett, Gwen, and Hugo. The trail was simple. It was long, and it had some nice quiet moments of hours walking. Speaking of quiet, I still can't hear the environment of nature. It was like I was walking in a loop filled with quiet trees, but the beautiful sights and my friends aren't something to complain with, as we walked for hours on the trails, telling each other about things had been and the things they knew. Hugo was the first to complete the trail, then Emmett, and then Gwen, and then Margaret, and I was the last to complete it. Well, basically, I was far behind Margaret before I could finish. Just as I was about to finish the trail, I heard a stick snap next to me. Well, not close to me, just some few feet away from me. Now, sticks don't naturally snap on their own, so instinctively, I turned and I spotted a bit of movement in the distance. It looked like something. It looked a bit smaller than me. I thought it was probably a wolf or some kind of mountain cat. But just before I looked any closer, whatever it was disappeared further into the trees. And it was somehow not making a single sound as it departed away from me. Almost like whatever it was hiding from me. I turned back and decided to finish the trail and leave. The rest of the day was uneventful. We spent most of the day at the lake, drinking and fishing. Jay cooked up some burgers that weren't terrible, as we gladly ate them along with the many fish we caught. When dusk hit again, we all spent the time at the campfire. Me and Margaret looked up at the night sky, happily looking at the quiet, beautiful sky with the many bright stars in them. I looked down as Margaret gave me a double-decker s'more. I ate it happily, and I looked at Emmett and Gwen with their romance growing, and then remembering their happiest times being in the forest during their childhood, as they looked up at the sky and pointed at the many lights up therefrom, pointing at the planets like Venus, to pointing at stars like Canis Majoris. I then looked at the others. Jake was there telling his spooky stories, just like he does every time we can't, while Hugo, Vicky, and Tom listened, getting spooked and laughing along at his jokes and puns too. Then, we all went back to the cabin and went upstairs to our bedrooms. I didn't have trouble falling asleep this time, as I happily rested in my bed, letting dreamland take me away with Margaret. Just what felt like a half an hour. After I drifted off with Margaret, we were both startled awake by the sound of screaming. Both of our eyes cracked open as we both looked around in the darkness. There were two screams that happened at the same time. It sounded like they belonged to a man and a woman. I looked at Margaret and she looked at me back before I recognized who the two voices of the screams belonged to. It was from Hugo and Vicky. Margaret came up to me as I opened my bedroom door, and as I did, I saw Emmett and Gwen in the hallway along with Jake opening his door as well. We all gave each other confused looks before going to Hugo and Vicky's door and knocking. After receiving no answer, I opened their door and went inside. Hugo was sitting on the floor wide-eyed, covered in sweat, and Vicky was sitting on the bed, sharing the same fear expression as Hugo. As Margaret came to Vicky, I walked towards Hugo and tried to get his attention, but Hugo wouldn't turn to look at me. His eyes seemed to be fixed something else. I looked at Vicky and Margaret, and what unsettled me is that not only was Vicky wasn't also responding to see something, but Margaret was also too terrified. She was looking in the same direction Vicky was looking, and the three of them were looking at the window. Emmett, Gwen, and Jake and I then decided to glance over in unison towards Hugo and Vicky's window, trying to know what's scaring them so badly. And when we did, I heard Gwen shriek and hug Emmett tightly in fear, and I heard Jake over my shoulder shout, "What the hell is that?" As for me, I didn't say anything, nor made any noise whatsoever. I just felt my muscles tighten. On the other side of Hugo and Vicky's window was a figure. It wasn't anything I'd seen before. With a faint of a moonlight outside, I could barely see his face. I know this is gonna sound very weird, but it had a smooth head. It had no eyes, but it had a mouth filled with razor-sharp teeth, and it looked like it was smiling. It had a large belly, and from what I could tell, it had a huge slash mark on its chest, like if the creature had fought against a bear or something, but also had many scar marks on his body, like if it was a rogue hunter that picked fights with other predators or prey. The creature's skin also looked pale, a stark contrast behind the darkness around it. The creature was opening its mouth and closing it like fast, like if it was biting at us, while still making the same smiling expression as it darted its head, looking at each of every one of us. Even though it had no eyes, it still looked like it was watching, or at least tried to look at us through the window, like a child looking at the window of a candy store, seeing the many sweets inside of it. It was unsettling seeing how this thing moved. It felt like an eternity of this thing watching us, or at least trying to, due to the lack of the eyes it had. Suddenly, the creature stopped smiling, and it then started to descend from the window. Hugo and Vicky didn't move a muscle. Neither did Emmett, Gwen, or Jake. Yet for some reason, I felt drawn to the window. And when Margaret saw me moving, she followed me too. We both peered outside and saw it. The creature was about the same size as a dwarf, but its arms looked too long for its body. And despite that, thanks to its long claws, it crawled onto the side of the house like a spider. The creature crawled onto all floors before it made its way to the ground below. It somehow wasn't making a single sound with each step or grip it took. The creature moved its head to look at the house with its natural expression on its eyeless face. And I could see it trying to look back at us one more time before it took off into the shack with its door wide open, disappearing in the darkness like if it was retreating deeper in the shack. Me, Margaret, and the rest of my friends all sat there staring at each other for a few moments, until Tom came stumping into the room asking what is going on. None of us said anything, and we all went back to our rooms. I doubt either of us slept a wink that night. The following day, as we all packed to leave, I couldn't help but notice and stare at the many strange footprints leading off to the shack. As I saw the shack with its door wide open, then suddenly the door slammed shut, like if that creature was still inside. What made me nervous was that these footprints and seeing the door of the shack shut close violently did confirm that what we all saw that night was real. But there were 10 more identical yet separate tracks leading off to various directions. I didn't want to go into that shack because I feared what could actually be in there this time, and didn't want to tell my friends either. I knew something would happen if I or any of us, hell, if all of us came into the shack. It's now been a week ever since, and I tried to forget about the whole event. To this day, I still don't know where that creature was, and don't even want to know what this shack really hides. But I doubt I'll be renting any more cabins. Ever.